So before we hear our incredible panelists talk about their personal journeys and challenges, I wanted to take time to reflect on one of the many stories that I've heard about Dr. Louisa O'Donoghue, a remarkable Aboriginal woman, a trailblazer for Aboriginal rights, who overcame challenges in search for change. So I'll just give you a bit of a short story about her. So she was born in South Australia in 1932 and was just 2 years old when she and two of her sisters were taken away from their mother by missionaries. They weren't even allowed to speak their own languages or ask questions about their origins or even about their parents. So ever since her childhood, she set her sights on becoming a nurse, but was refused entry to the Royal Adelaide Hospital to continue her studies simply because she was Aboriginal. So she fought her decision, thus becoming her like this whole lifelong advocacy of the rights for Aboriginal women and Aboriginal people. And she first became the first trainee nurse at the Royal Adelaide Hospital in 1954. And so ever since, she went on to become the nurse in charge of the ward, then made a move to the South Australian Public Service. And then she joined the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. And 3 years later, she became the first woman to be the regional director of an Australian federal department. We did mention she was a trailblazer, didn't we? So Dr. O'Donoghue's commitment to creating a better change for Aboriginal people continues to this day. Her resilience, efforts, and lived experiences remind us there is still work to be done in advocating fearlessly for change and improvement, something I hope we can all connect with tonight. So moving on from here, I would like to start off with what Ladies That UX is. So Ladies That UX is basically a global meetup group that was started in Manchester in 2013, and our Melbourne chapter started in 2014. And our purpose is basically to provide a platform for all women identifying and non-binary folks to speak, facilitate, and share their language. And with us today, we have Ever and Berlin, who are co-organizers, joining us. And you can reach out to us to know more about Ladies That UX. So before we start, I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. So just please keep yourself on mute as we go through this panel. The session will be recorded. So I am going to start recording the session now so that we can, if everyone's okay with it, please let me know. And if there's anyone who doesn't want to be recorded, I can just please turn your cameras off or turn your videos off if you're not comfortable. So I'll just start recording.
Anshel, so sorry, just checking in. Ever's already started recording.
Oh, my bad.
All right, all good, all good.
I just wanted to check, so that's good. So if you wanted to read the code of conduct, you can go through ladiesthatux.com and code of conduct, and we're going to be doing a poll and Q&A via Slido. So what you need to do is just go to www.slide.do, and the code is 58728. And you'll find yourself a section on poll and Q&A. I'll just talk about the poll in a second. So basically, we're asking the audience today, as we start our introductions, to think about what are the biggest barriers you face as a woman in your organization. We have created a poll on Slido. So if you just went on to Slido and 58728, you'll be able to see a couple of options, and we're going to use that and engage our speakers with one of the answers as we go through some of our questions in a few minutes. So yeah, please, as we start, I would like for everyone to just go on to that and cast your votes. All right, and I'll start with the introductions of our speakers. So today we have 4 really amazing women who are basically challenging and changing the ways women in design work in tech and leading industries. So over here we have Ailie, Remya, Ailie, and Susie. So I'll start by introducing themselves just a little bit. So Ailie is a Melbourne-based designer who works at Fjord, and she's originally trained in industrial design and has worked around Melbourne, Sydney, and Berlin. And her UX journey started at Commonwealth Bank, and she's worked with clients spanning many industries during her time at agencies like Fjord, Isobar, and Safe and Razorfish. So she's really passionate about making real change within government, healthcare, and food systems via human-centered design. Then we have Remya. So Remya is currently head of digital experience at Coles and has been growing and leading multidisciplinary teams for over a decade. She's really passionate about helping organizations clarify their vision, develop their design and digital strategy, and innovate their products and experiences. Remya enjoys pro bono volunteering aimed at attracting women to technology and proactively developing the careers of these working in the sector. Next, we have Ailie. So Ailie is the founder and chief empathy officer at Square One, and is a respected voice in the space of life innovation, human-centered design, and transformation. So she's got 22 years of experience working internationally in transformation and innovation, and that has been a vital part of the rebirth of Square One and Ailie's attempt to design her life using design thinking, neuroscience, psychology, and mindfulness. And next up, we have Susie. So Susie is a human-centered service designer who's played an active role in delivering on many key projects, including the City of Melbourne, the Yarra Valley Water, Australian Red Cross, Info Exchange, Department of Education, and most recently RACV. As a service designer, she's able to unravel complex problems using a human-centered approach. And she's driven by building capability of ACD within organizations to educate and grow to knowledge of how we can be better humans using a human-centric approach and mindset. So what I'm going to do is pass over to Berlin, and Berlin is going to start talking and introducing the questions.
Amazing. So just mic check. Everyone can hear me fine? All good? Amazing. Thanks so much, Anshul, and welcome everyone. I'm very excited to have you all today with the most amazing panel lineup. I'm so excited about this. We are going to do a few bits of experiments with this panel, given it's all remote and virtual. So we will display our questions on the screen. So in case anyone can't hear us, do let us know. You know, technology sometimes fails on us. So hopefully we'll have a great time. So let's begin, Anshul. All right, so to our panelists, each of you have incredibly rich stories around where you've taken your career thus far. I love that we have a variety of designers in the room, not just UX. We've got service designers and we have people who've taken human-centered design to a whole other level with Ailie's business. I would like to dive a little bit more into the experiences with gender dynamics in your career. And perhaps you've seen improvements. I hope you have seen improvements in gender dynamics at work along your journey. But I'm really curious to know, what are you most surprised by that hasn't changed in this day and age? And what do you think is still contributing to it? I'm happy to open this up to anyone to kick us off. And then, yeah.
I might jump in first to make sure there's not much of an awkward silence. So I think something so this is almost a little bit controversial, but something I kind of want to say first is that I think so Fjord is owned by Accenture, and I think sometimes at Accenture we're actually in quite a bubble. So we have a female CEO, so our Fjord leader for APAC, Bronwyn, is a woman, and we pretty much have our 50-50 split as well. And sometimes we get used to that and we think that that is the norm, but it really isn't as well. And I think even in the design industry, sometimes it does look like there's a lot of equality or gender equality compared to a lot of other industries. So when you think about politics and media, hospitals, so many other places where there is a lot more gender inequality in lots of ways. In saying that, though, I think one of the biggest things that hasn't necessarily changed, and I don't think this is necessarily true where I work at the moment, but it's definitely been true of other places I've worked at, is boys clubs at the top of the food chain that don't often leave like space for women to kind of join. And if there is women that kind of are able to join that boys club, it might only be one, and it ends up feeling like for other women there's only that one space left at the top, and that some women might need to fight for that when actually they should just be getting a bigger slice of the pie. So yeah, I think there's definitely boys clubs that still exist in so many places. I do have other things to say, but I'm going to pass to someone else first before I say anything else.
Ailie or Remya or Susie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Oh, sorry, Ramesh, you can go first.
I think it was me, but that's
Go, Susie, go ahead.
Oh,
I was going to say pretty much a very similar reflection to Ailie as well. I've come from a world in design where it's been led by women. I've been taught by women. I've walked into organizations where I'm very lucky to have such a strong representation of amazing designers that are women. And I feel, once again, I think that bubble, if it exists, particularly in Melbourne, there are so many great women designers that are out there and sharing their knowledge, that it does surprise me when you start to see statistics like we're seeing, where design isn't being represented or women aren't being represented at the table in design. So I think, to your point, Berlin, it is interesting to see that women still aren't getting that share or that equality or equity when it comes to being in those positions or the leadership positions within design, because I've had nothing over the last 6 years but incredible experiences with women and men, but predominantly, you know, the consultancy I started at was run and built by a woman. I'm in a design team now where the GM is a woman, you know, so I think I've been very lucky.
That's so awesome. Ailie, you're based in Brisbane. Do you have any thoughts similar to what Susie and Ailie have mentioned, or contradicting thoughts?
yeah, no contradicting, but I guess just to add to it, I think for me, you know, historically there has been this ongoing battle between, you know, the feminine side and the masculine side, and that applies to the roles that we play. And within a woman, we do actually have that feminine side and the masculine side. And I think it's been actually, for me, what I'm surprised that it hasn't changed is that self-discovery of that feminine side for us women. I think there is a tendency to think that when we need to step up into a more senior role, we need to become more masculine. We need to be louder. We need to be more extroverted. We need to become something that we're not. And we're not that person. We're not masculine. Neither are men feminine. So I think it's just really finding that balance on understanding that we are able now in this DNA, when there is so much growth and inwards personal development, to really look at yourself and stop really comparing yourself to others, because you're unique and your talent is unique. And I think for us women to understand that we don't need to become that very strong male voice in a large boardroom. We just need to be ourselves. So I think that's my contribution to the question.
Oh, good. I have something to add on that, but I'll hear from Remya first, because I'm keen to hear what she finds hasn't changed that's peculiar.
I think I want to echo what Ailie, Susie, and Flynn have already said. From my angle, I feel like women, we are very nurturing, and we bring that attribute to workplace as well. So that also means we'll be the one reaching out to a colleague who might be going through a rough time, and also helping team and community to come together. That's, I always found in workplaces, that's something without even realizing we actively do. There's a lot of emotional labor attached to it, and mental, I guess, bandwidth that needed to bring that team or the practice or your colleagues together. So someone called it out today because I was organizing a team lunch, and they said, have you ever noticed it's women, us, always had to do this? Whereas if it's a diverse team, but none of the men would actively take a lead role in saying, hey, let me go and organize this team lunch. Let me do our social team stuff. It's always us who think about how do we bond together? How do we support the team? And I thought that's such a great dynamics difference in a workplace situation, which we often don't think about because we don't think that it's an added label, it's an added unpaid work. But I just want to call it out because someone just opened my eyes today and I never thought about it until now. So if anyone on the call can relate to it, have a think about it next time when your team is wanting to organize something, who's actually taking a lead on it, and see if we can call it out and make a change.
That's so amazing. I think half the problem sometimes is when you're not aware and all of this is subtle and you take it for granted. I suppose coming back to the awareness piece and what Ailie mentioned, and again, I want to dive deeper into this about how I guess the self-discovery conversation is still a thing, like where if we need to be in the room, we need to be somewhat masculine. But I have to say, and again, I'm keen to hear from the panelists, I mean, in politics, especially in COVID-19, we heard a lot about female leaders, how they ran their countries. I mean, Jacinda Ardern's next level, she's amazing. But other female leads from Germany to Finland to Taiwan, how they are leading in politics. Oh no, Ansha, I'm still in the first one, haha. How they're leading in politics and how it's different to be a woman in politics and it's okay to be empathetic and so forth. So I'm wondering, is that still a thing in design and tech when the industry is still, it's known to be quite progressive compared to politics, I suppose, but do you still feel like that isn't embraced full-heartedly in the design and tech industry? Do we still have lots to go, or are we a bit more aware in that space? Ailie, sorry, Ailie.
Ailie or Ellie? Sorry.
Oh gosh, this is confusing.
I know.
Ailie, you go first, and then Ailie, I'll pass it to you.
I'll go first. What I was going to say is that we women, by default, psychologically, we tend to have more analyzing behaviors than men in ways that actually are very multidimensional and quite nurturing in many ways, just because of the actual hormones that we have in our bodies. And it's got to do with our brains and all of that. And I think when it comes to design and innovation, especially, I think we're able to really gather sufficient amount of data while we're still comfortable, and this is, I'm just going to speak from experience, when we're still comfortable being in that kind of ambiguity of that diverging process. Some of the men that I've worked with in design have been probably more moving to more of that solution mode. That's just because that's their DNA, that's how they're made, that's biologically what they do. And so I think for us women, I think I've noticed that really great balance of having a multidimensional team where we have that combination of that feminine designer versus the masculine designer is actually a beautiful mix. That's kind of what all teams need: diversity, inclusion, right? And that's been what I've seen from my personal experience.
Ailie, you can jump in.
So I guess I want to go back to my little safe bubble that I've been in within my Fjord team, and I think so for our team, it's quite interesting because all the designers on our team have a huge amount of empathy. That's like what makes us all good designers in lots of ways, anyway. And so our team is really similar, and I think in some ways that almost like we lack. Within Fjord, we maybe lack some of that diversity in different ways of thinking a little bit, but we do gain that from being part of Accenture. So I almost don't know how to unpack this properly. There's, I think, definitely within design communities, because part of what being a good designer is having that ability to have empathy, that a lot of the really great designers, regardless of whether they're men or women, do have a huge amount of empathy. And of course, there's still people that end up at the top that lack that, but I think it is just becoming so much more commonly accepted that to be a good designer, you have to have that level of empathy. And you might not get to the top if you don't have that anymore.
Cool. I actually wanted, you brought up something earlier in your first answer about, even though you haven't experienced it, the boys club, and still it's a topic, and Susie, you touched on this, but from Ailie or Remya, have you experienced that? I'm just keen to unpack it if that applies to any of your past experience, because to your point, Ailie, most designers that come into the tech industry are quite empathetic, but then we have this narrative that still exists today about the boys club, or at least male seniors, which hasn't seemed to change, even though it's still being talked about.
So I think something to just quickly add on to that as well is, even if we are designers, we don't actually often get the chance to work with other designers. So obviously we get to work with them sometimes, but generally you're on a mixed team with people from all kinds of different disciplines. So it almost doesn't matter how great your design team is, you'll still experience some kind of gender inequality because you're working with heaps of other people. And so I guess I won't name the company or the project that I work for on this one, but there definitely, a few years ago, there was a project that I worked on where it was quite a big project. There was about 15 of us on it originally, and 2 of the women went on maternity leave, and they both got replaced with men, and it ended up just being myself and 14 men on this project, and they were all like great people and everything, but slowly my voice just disappeared on the project because it became a boys club. And I think no matter how great the people are on a project, if you are somehow in a room full of men and the only woman, no matter what, you just won't get heard anymore. I don't 100% understand how that works, but that's at least been my experience, and for other people that I know as well. You just kind of get cancelled out when that dynamic happens, and it does sometimes happen.
Remya or Ailie or Susie? I saw you popped off mute.
I was just going to say, I think the interesting thing from my perspective is I've been embedding human-centered design in a capability way at RACV for nearly 2.5 years, and before that in other roles. But what I'm seeing now is the men that come into these spaces and are really starting to embrace empathy. And I think as part of human-centered design, we need to, that's the thing that we're teaching. We're starting to think about bringing our leaders and the organization, male and female, into a space that we're teaching empathy, and they're really starting to think, this is something that's been maybe missing from their world. So I think what I'm seeing is a shift, and I don't know if once again it's the organization that I've been in, but definitely executive leadership, men in those positions are really, really keen to start to unpack and understand empathy and how they can bring that into their world as well. So I think women are by nature empathic creatures, and so I'm finding it quite refreshing that this is a part of a learning that people really want to grab onto and embrace.
Amazing. I have just realized how difficult it is to balance virtually 4 speakers on the panel, because yes, I would love to hear from anyone else, but I think to your point about building empathy amongst men, there's also perhaps potentially a different generational shift because we're talking so much about it now. I think some of the education sectors I've read some pieces, not research, but articles about how younger kids, I would say teenagers and so forth, are questioning more, really kind of seeing that it's okay. So I think it won't be obvious in the next generation, but I wonder if we will see a shift in how people embrace empathy. I suppose we can only speak on behalf of a certain period, but that is a very interesting call, especially after Ailie sharing her experience of how it's kind of not intentional. I'm sure it's not intentional of being cancelled out, but when it happens, it's almost like surreal when you see it happening around you. I would love to kind of dive a bit more into this before we move to the next question. But keen to hear, actually, Remya, I would love to hear from you because we hadn't heard from you earlier.
Thanks, Berlin. I know we kind of deviated a little bit from the question. Do you mind repeating the question again?
Not a problem. So yeah, you're right. We have deviated. This is kind of half the fun of a panel, I suppose. No, but I just wanted to hear if you have had any previous experience with what I think Ailie mentioned before about, I think something that hasn't changed until this day, even though some of the panelists in the room have not experienced it, is very heavy male leadership in design. Keen to hear whether it has you've experienced this yourself, because Susie and Ailie both mentioned perhaps there's a bit of a bubble in their worlds where they haven't. Really keen to hear about it from your perspective.
Thanks, Berlin. I guess from my experience, again, I can only speak my lived experiences. I've been very fortunate to be part of certain companies who are actively aware of this systematic issue and how the organizations are bringing people on board and how they're supporting their people. So even though it kind of felt like, being the only single female in a larger leadership forums, I've received that active support from some of my peers to be able to speak up if I feel I'm not feeling very confident. So I do want to acknowledge that there are male champions of change in workplaces these days, and a lot of education, a lot of work some of these organizations are doing the behind the scene is still making a change. But I do want to acknowledge the fact that there are parts where how the organization is set up and how women are seeing what kind of behaviors and performances get rewarded really impacts that. Because if you're seeing your male colleague who may or may not work at the same level or even below you in terms of performance are getting rewarded because they are very amplifying their work and really being out there presenting the work, whereas we want to be proud in our work, but we want to talk about it because it's all about, we think our work should speak volume, but sometimes we live in a world where that's not the case, that doesn't get rewarded the way we want it. And we're a little bit shy about, taking our work or our output to a larger audience in that sense. So I do see where women feeling like they have an identity crisis, or they feel like, that's not me, I don't want to be that person bragging about my stuff. But the reality is, if you don't step up into that space and really starting to amplify your work, someone else will, and that would slowly starting to shift and change. So that's how I felt. And again, it's multi-layered situation, and there's so many different aspects and angles we could look into it.
That's a really good call out. It's really fascinating when you think about how it's systematic. If organizations aren't set up as well to consider the diversity in the room, can go against you, which I think this definitely leads to our next question pretty smoothly. Ansha, if you don't mind. So, still 2020, it's 2021, right? And we are still talking about the lack of representation of women in design, but in particular, design leadership. I mean, Ailie, you already just brought it up, but it's definitely still a thing. In 2019, Envision reported that women held about 11% of leadership positions in the design field. I'm still searching for what it's like in 2020 or 2021, and I've yet to come across a figure, but let's just say 11% in 2019 is still very small. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest, or perhaps newest challenges that women in design today face as they're looking to step up into leadership roles? And I'm going to pass this over to Susie first.
It's a great question. And I think the interesting thing from my perspective is when you move through different organizations, and I think I've been lucky in my career in design to have gone into different sectors. So I've worked in local government, I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in consulting. Every one of those organizations has either started design or is doing design in a very different way from the other. So I think diversity and leadership in design is I think for women, it's really forging their own path. And it's not something that you can go from one organization and take that skill and set it up again in another. It's actually forging that path as your own person and your own voice and your own practice, and bringing people along on that journey. And I think the organizations where I've seen it really thrive, it's those women are getting the voice at the table, and they are getting time to represent, design and their careers, in these different forums. So I think for me, women in design, 11% is really, really, really low. But I think also, design is still up and coming as well. And particularly in organisations, RACV is a great example. That's, an old school, been around for 125 years, but design is absolutely thriving in there. And I think that is down to the fact that we have had some very strong women in design sitting at the executive leadership table and talking about it. And that's not to say that conversation would be any different if it was a man, but I think that there is that shift now that, design in itself, let alone whether it's male or female, is forging its own way in different organisations in different ways.
When you say forging your own way, I'm keen to unpack that a little bit. Like, and then if anyone in the room has got similar questions, but what what is an example of, I guess, doing it your own way? Because I suppose we as designers, we're always trying new things, right? So what in particular are you referring to that really stands out from not doing it in a new way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it comes back to, I think, having empathy for the organisation you're walking into as well, and being able to adjust and see what that organisation needs just as much as, you know, where you've come from. So I think what I've seen in the past is the pivoting and the adjustment. So forging, you know, every story is different when it comes to design, and every practice is different, and the way that people do it is different, and the designers that they bring into their team is different. So we have a really great hybrid model at RACV where we work with consultants that are other designers, but we're also working within the organisation to build capability by teaching people design and doing design. So, and that's just, you know, and a different model to consultancy where you go in as a designer and you actually do the work and then you leave. So I think forging your own way, I think every place you go, you know, as a woman, you create your own story. And I think design is all about creating new ways of working.
Amazing. I would love to hear as well from Remya. Remya, you're head of experience design at Coles. What would you have to say in terms of stepping up to leadership, some of the newest, or I guess more unusual challenges you've seen yourself, or maybe perhaps your network has?
Thank you. Great question. I just want to speak from my experience in the past 10 years being a part of the Melbourne design community, and especially design leadership community within that as well. I remember 2 years ago when Envision organized a design leadership forum. 20 of the design leaders were chosen across Melbourne, all our head of design at the time. And it was only 2 women, and one was Lou Sporton from RACV and myself at the time. And we were very surprised, you know, and we were in between this 18 other men as a part of this leadership forum. And there were other head of designs, probably less than 5 I could count at the time, but very, very small group. And that really prompted me to do a bit of research. Like any designer, I love a good customer research. So I reached out to a lot of female, senior designers who are ready to step in or already doing a bit of design leadership work, but not really actively looking for a head of design or design leader kind of role. And the number one point came out in that is they just want to have a job that helps them to balance the family. So they are not looking for your long hours. They are not looking for a high pressure, intense environment where they feel like some of these head of designs are in that position. So they just want to have something stable, something they could still, do meaningful work while they're taking care of family, supporting the family. And that doesn't have to be children. That could be supporting your elderly, and you are having family care responsibilities in one way or the other. So that was number one. And secondly, I feel women feel like they need to know everything before they could step into a leadership position. They feel like, oh, I'm not ready. I probably need to do that stretch assignment, or I want to do that XYZ projects to be able to feel I'm ready for it. So if you're in an organization who do not have a support structure or do not have a support environment to help you grow your career, then you're always stuck in that level because you always feel like you're not ready to move to that next stage. And you just keep being in that space for a very, very long time unless you are, you cross to a mentor or a coach or a sponsor who could then advocate for you. So it's kind of, these are the two I come across as two key points that a lot of women in my network are feeling, and how they feel like they don't need that design leadership level, from their point. So that means a lot of women are stepping back and taking a back seat and letting others to, come through and take that lead role, and again, impacting the numbers that you see today with 11% in design leadership. I feel like it is really skewing that numbers, but that doesn't mean the rest of 89% of male leadership is amazing. There are a lot of females in that space, but are not really ready to put their hand up saying, I'm ready to do this. That's kind of my experience.
Oh wow. I was writing down notes, 22 out of 20 design leaders. That would be a shock to just look around you. And as you mentioned about women wanting to find a job that can balance the family and whatnot, it's interesting to hear that could be still a thing today. When I came across a company called Puffling, which is all about job sharing, but not for jobs that are often like casual jobs, but actual professional jobs and potentially leadership roles, job sharing leadership roles, challenging that norm. I'm very keen to hear from Ailie, given that you're a founder of a company yourself. What are your thoughts about this topic, especially as someone who's running her own business? And I guess the new world of job sharing or not job sharing. Yeah, I'm keen to hear from you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've got a little bit to add because I think a year and a half ago, I did a large conference, not conference, it was an event on design leadership. And it was exactly that, how we can step in into those leadership roles as a designer. And one of the things that came back time and time again, as we know, the imposter syndrome thing, which is, I'm not ready. Someone will find out that I don't know everything. Someone is going to figure out that I actually don't have all the answers, and that keeps on happening a lot in I think whether you're a junior, a mid-level, or a leader. In my experience, at the moment, I'm consulting for a large engineering firm as the head of human-centered design, and I'm 40 and I can tell you this for sure. I don't even have Teams on my phone because my boundaries are so very clear. And I think a lot of women who step into leadership roles, they want to be everything for everybody. And you got to be everything for yourself, to be completely honest. And your team has to understand the dynamics of your ways of working. And I think we designers can be terrible at doing that inside work with our own team. And we think that we need to come in and have all the answers as a leader, but we don't. We actually could step back and do the whole design process with our team, co-creating how we're going to work. What do you like? What don't you like? What time do you want to clock off during the day? What time of the day will be best to meet? And I think a lot of this pressure can be taken off a design leader's role because it is so important to bring that co-creation process, I think. And secondly, I would say that as leaders, we tend to not have all the answers, and that's okay. But I think understanding what other pathways exist beyond the traditional, structures of teams around diversity and inclusion, that's still very important and relevant. But actually there's different characteristics of teams, and I'm not going to be able to deep dive, but there is a biological component into the teams that you could have within your group, and how each individual actually will resonate with different roles, who is going to be good at what. And as a leader, I can tell you, for me, it's helped me immensely to understand, if I was to set up a team of 5, whether it's men or women, who is going to be best at doing that role. And that superpower is something that comes with knowledge, and it's something that comes with understanding something that's called biotypes. And again, I'm not going to be able to type. You can Google this or you can reach out later. It's super powerful. And I think that's a kind of a alternative pathway to what we know as a leader, as to how we set up teams as well.
Oh my God, that is so fascinating. I'm writing so much notes. We'll definitely jump back into biotypes in a sec, but you raised something which again, smoothly goes into our next question. But it was about balancing roles and having boundaries and whatnot. So, Anshal, next slide, amazing. Employees around the world are struggling to do their jobs in this pandemic. I mean, I am definitely going to put my hand up and say I'm that person, feeling like they're always on, battling with burnout. And, we're seeing a lot more research coming out saying that the pandemic has been particularly tough on women. And, it doesn't matter if it's in Australia or beyond. McKinsey recently published their Women in the Workplace report. And although US focused, a lot of people have referenced it because they believe it's potentially representing other markets. And the key call out of it that was quite worrying is that it's suggesting that COVID-19 could set women back by half a decade, with more women leaving the workforce to cope with family, caregiving related duties. So I want to know, in your experience working in design and tech, what are your thoughts on women being negatively impacted from a professional and or personal standpoint? I'll pass it to Ailie first, and we'll go from there.
So I think all the things that you've already said are huge things, and definitely there's so many women that I know that have young kids and have been much more affected, and it still is generally women that do more of that work than men. But I think something that I've been talking to a lot of younger women about is just this thing of, when you're working from home, you actually end up, and maybe this applies to some men as well, but it's kind of this feel of imposter syndrome comes through a lot more when you're working from home as opposed to when you're in the office. And there's a few kind of reasons that we're kind of thinking about that might be. Part of it is, I think a lot of women really take a lot of pride about getting dressed up to go into the office and like wearing something nice, and that really makes you feel like a great kind of businesswoman. And there's just no motivation to do that sometimes when you're working from home. Put shoes on in the morning, and then as soon as you get to your desk, you kick them off and sit cross-legged on your chair. So I think that kind of aspect of COVID kind of forcing people to work from home, and then I think particularly in the tech industry, a lot of us might never actually properly return back to the office. And there's definitely positives to that, but there's also quite a few negatives to it as well. Another part of this as well is I think there's been a lot of talk about more men returning back to the office than women in some circumstances, because suddenly women have got a lot more used to looking after kids or so forth. And a big part of the problem with that is who gets seen, like who actually physically gets seen in the office. And it doesn't matter if who's doing more work or who's doing better work, but it's the person that gets seen is the person that will get promoted later on. So they're kind of two things that I've been thinking a lot about lately.
Wow, it's pretty, yeah, I know. I'm just like trying to gather my thoughts because can't help but reflect on it personally as well. Actually, you said something that was very interesting about more men returning to the office and more like, I suppose, I don't know much of the context behind that, but especially because there are some researchers out there that say that women are impacted, mainly single mothers and people of color as well were really heavily impacted. But the way I'm coming from this, and again, maybe I'll pass this on to Ailie just to hear your thoughts on this. But again, tech and design more often than not is described as a pretty progressive industry. Perhaps I want to know, what is your organization doing to address, I guess, not just the impacts of COVID, but particularly the impacts of COVID on our female colleagues or employees? Yeah, I'm just keen to hear on that.
I love your perspective, Ailie, because I actually had a really good answer in my head, and then when you said it's like, oh, I gotta shut up because it's actually no good. Okay, so I think what's happened with COVID is that a lot of the social norms and business norms that we knew to date have been shifted or have to be completely sort of revised. And even to what you said, Ailie, I think even that, and I'm just creating this hypothesis, is it the showing up to work enough to get a promotion? Or is it about, being a connector or a promoter of the work, which we women are particularly terrible at? Like, we do great work, but we're terrible at promoting our work. And I actually work from home 4 days a week. When I have to go to the office, it's like, oh, I have to go to the office. This is the worst day ever. I'm an introvert, so I love working. And my team is in Melbourne and Sydney, so I don't have to go to the office. And I think is actually getting us women to think, if I am comfortable working from home because I have little people like I do, I have little people at home and it's amazing. I could just 20 minutes, block my diary, pick them up, come back, carry on with my work, do meetings, whatever. What do I need to do to then achieve those things that I want to achieve in the next 12 months? Is it promoting my work? Is it connecting with people? Is it going into the office even though I don't have to? And I think we in our careers have been pre-COVID so busy and so caught up in the doing that is this moment where we actually have been given an opportunity to really reflect. And that reflection process for me is quite important, to actually really step back and go, what do I actually want to get out of COVID in a way? And how do I want to show up to my work, to my people? And yeah, I guess that's what I wanted to say about that. But a great point, Ailie. I love what you said.
I love that you've taken this completely on, flipped it on its head of like, what do I need to do to achieve what I want to get out of this, which is so proactive and amazing. I am just conscious of time, but I would love to dig into this. But you know what? Let's just move on, and then I'll come back and reverse a few of the conversations. We're going to jump into our poll results, which I have here with me. So we flip to the next slide. We asked the audience in the room, what are the biggest barriers you face as a woman in your organization? We had a few answers, just a list of answers. So we had gender-based hiring, unconscious bias against women and their performance, lack of women in leadership roles, lack of mentorship, lack of support for caregiving duties, and unequal pay. Now, the results here are quite close. In leading by, at 55% is lack of women in leadership roles, which we've touched on about and discussed a little bit in the beginning. But quite closely behind are unconscious bias against women in their performance and lack of mentorship. And I suppose I'll invite Remya to jump into to jump in first. Do you have anything to say about, I guess, addressing unconscious bias against women performance or mentorship? I think we talked about it very, very briefly.
Yeah, I feel like we touched on some of these topics in early questions, but I'll probably pick on lack of mentorship. And again, this goes back to what we were talking earlier about, how do we lean on each other? And if we don't even know who that person that we can lean on in terms of that leadership perspective. And if you're looking for a female mentor, and then it's harder to find where. In my experience, I found there are a bunch of female, leaders out there who are happy to coach and happy to support, but they are feeling exhausted because they feel like they're having the same conversation over and over and over. Then how do we build a network of other women that could come in and help and actually share the load? And how do we collectively support each other? And ladies at UX exists for the same reason. 5 years ago, when I, kicked off this work with a bunch of women from, Deloitte, Melbourne back then, we were a group of 5 women who couldn't find women in other UX meetups at the time, 2004. And when I look at it now, we are a strong community of 2,500 women. And these are the platforms we're creating. And again, it took us 5 years to get where we are today. But we are slowly making progress, and we're building a community of amazing women to come together and support each other and be a part of each other's life in one way or the other. So there are forums existing like our forum, but I also want to encourage, if you've been, if you have been blessed through a coaching or mentoring, be a blessing for someone. Try to lift someone else while you're also climbing your own ladder in your life, whether it's professional or personal. How do we lift others while we do that? So that's the one message I want to leave with everyone.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Remya. Susie, we haven't heard from you in a while. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that Remya, you really touched on 2 big things that almost interplaying into what we were saying before. I think we are a karma-driven network within design and within women, and I've seen that support come for me. So I am always quite open to giving it back. But I think with COVID and with lockdown and with the boundaries of home and work getting very blurred, we are exhausted and we are tired, because those boundaries that were very structured before, you could go into the office, you knew where your work started and your home life finished, and we give and give and give. And I think mentorship is a hard one, because there is that finding that time and that extra space to do it and to do it well. But on my journey, I have gathered really amazing women who not only have taught me, but I have been able to share in a community way back and forward, and have become great, great friends, not just mentors. But I don't think there is a time where I haven't been able to go and ask someone if I'm in a design dilemma or a work dilemma or, a life dilemma, that these women don't step up and in a human-centered and a beautifully human-centered way support me. So yeah, and I have found those women through my work, through design.
I'm keen to hear as well, maybe Ailie can talk about this, because we were talking about the bubbles that we are in earlier. I suppose when we talk about mentorship, I suppose this also comes up in my conversations with my friends, and particularly in the design group. It's kind of this word that we kind of know what it means, but then to get it happening, to get it started, can be a bit awkward. And then thus, if we don't start it, we feel the lack of it. keen to hear your thoughts on that space, or, you know, whether you have experienced amazing mentorship and how that went about, kind of similar to how Remya touched on it and Susie found it at work.
So this is actually quite an interesting one, just in the sense of, I think this is also really affected, has been really affected by lockdown and by COVID, in the sense that all of the most, so I've had heaps of mentors and still in touch with all of them, but they've all became mentors by working with them in a workplace and physically being there, having lunches with them, having all these great personal conversations about our lives, and then also about design as well, and becoming really good friends through those physical like those times that we've actually caught up physically. And I think you can definitely still build rapport with people online, and there's definitely people at Fjord that I've actually only ever met online, and I have an incredible rapport with them, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same as going out and having a whiskey or a wine with this person that you work with and you really look up to, or they really look up to you, and like that physical interaction is just always different, and you get so much more out of it, I think. So yeah, I've had quite a few conversations with friends lately just about, yeah, we've definitely got through lockdown and we've done a really good job, but at the same point, you actually, no matter what, you can't replace physical interaction. It's just a different ball game altogether. And I think in that sense of mentorship, I know, like, and only just reflecting on this now, I don't think I have had the same amount of mentorship that I've given or received last year as I would normally, just because I haven't gone and had drinks with people after work, or I haven't had coffees with people. Like, they're the actual times that you get those things. That's just my perspective. I'd love to hear from the others.
Yeah, very keen to, I'll pass it on to Ailie, because I just definitely want to hear from everyone, because the flip side to that, which I totally agree with you, humans are not designed to be behind screens 24/7. But the flip side to that is now geographical barriers are broken. If you wanted to have a mentor, like Ailie's based in Brisbane, if you actually wanted to have a relationship with her in, like, you know, mentorship relationship, it actually suddenly is kind of possible, which is kind of exciting. But I guess it's not the same. It's not an apple for apple. So I totally hear you on that. Ailie, again, because you're in Brisbane, I'm just keen to hear, with your office being in Sydney and Melbourne, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll touch on the two areas that we discussed. So lack of mentorship, I guess, I suppose. We definitely need guidance, and where we women are very good at analyzing, that's our personalities the majority of the time. I'm not saying we all are, but what happens is that we take on mentorships, or we have great conversations with mentor, but we don't act upon the actions that we need to act upon. And this is what's happened historically with women, and I can myself include in that, is that if I have a great conversation with a mentor and I might be, oh my God, this is mind blowing, what am I not doing this? Then the next day I do nothing about it. And I think sometimes we can very easily put that excuse, like, I don't have the right mentor, I don't have the right guidance, to not take action. And I think if we take the approach of designers, being curious, being comfortable in ambiguity, why don't we experiment with the stuff and the knowledge that we have in that moment to then move forward and take the actions to still then eventually be comfortable in that diverging process, and then eventually maybe get somewhere. And I think that will come from a mentor, that will come from so many other data points, but the action, I think, is what's going to be really important. So I think sometimes mentorship could be an excuse to not take the actions that we need to take. The other thing with unconscious bias, I actually created an unconscious bias toolkit with a design firm in the US. And we did that a few months ago off the back of Black Lives Matter, because I thought we needed to really help people to do the work. And the work that I call the work is that the inside work. So when we talk about unconscious bias against women, we need to actually do the work on ourselves and see and understand what are biases that we have towards women. Because let me tell you, we do have biases towards women. If you got to go and have a surgery and you say you've got a male doctor and you got a female doctor, statistically proven, you'd be more comfortable going with a male doctor. So how can we expect other people to change their biases if we don't change our own and we don't educate them? So I think, that was the whole reason why we created this unconscious bias toolkit. And by the way, if you want to download it, it's donation only. You can go on my Instagram. It's very transformational. I think we definitely need to do the work on ourselves to really understand why are we actually being biased, and how can we change the unconscious biases that we have, and which we can change for sure.
Oh, amazing. Yes, I should have mentioned to everyone in the room, we will send out a list of any of the resources we've spoken about today, including this toolkit, information about biotypes that we just talked about. It's very true that women have, as you mentioned, the surgeon, the male surgeon, male female surgeon situation. Actually, Ansha and I were just talking about it, how we found out we were totally we fell into that same trap where we didn't think that women could be surgeons, and we were horrified. We were like, oh gosh. But yes, I think Lean In as well has a whole list of unconscious bias that we may face, including maternity bias, which I didn't know until I learned about it, and was kind of horrified, because I think I do fall into instances where I show it, where you fall into the bias thinking as if someone is pregnant, they're less likely to be interested in coming out for drinks, or less likely to be blah, but that assumption is the bias, right? And I remember, wow, what a moment of being absolutely shocked at myself. So I'm very keen to see that toolkit from you, Ailie. And yes, I think you mentioned one more thing that I wanted to call out, which is experimenting with stuff that eventually at some point hopefully becomes comforting. So if anyone on the call, we've got a lot of people who are from interstate here, don't be afraid to reach out to any of us that are like on the call, well, at least any of our speakers. Challenge yourself. You never know where it might head to. I think, as Ailie mentioned, it's nothing like being face to face with someone, but hey, whilst this is the world we live in, there are some benefits out of it. On that same note of, I guess, taking some actionable takeaways, I want to leave us on a high. So I've got a couple more questions here. If you were to write a letter to your younger self, love this question because you never know where it'll go. What tips, advice, or even lessons would you share to encourage and support them? Susie, I'll pass this to you first.
It's a great question, and it's one that I probably change every year. depending on what I've learned, or maybe every decade, depending on what decade I'm in. But it's really interesting when, particularly I have two daughters as well. So when I write that letter, I sometimes feel I'm writing that letter for them as well as I am for myself. But I think the big one that we've touched on is that imposter syndrome that sits within a lot of us, and it probably buys into the mentorship as well. If we don't believe that we have the capability to be someone's mentor, then that's another reason that we don't put our hand up or come forward to say, let me help you. So for me, I think it's just believe in yourself. Make sure that there is always time to change as well. I think one thing I've learned in my career is that you don't need to just do one thing. You can completely stop and pivot and do something completely different. So don't be pigeonholed. And I know my kids even now they're telling them to start to think about what careers they want, and we can change our careers at any time and be anything we want. So I think if I was going to write a letter to myself, it would be, don't be frightened for change. Change is actually quite an exciting thing, and you can be anything you want to be. And design has been that lesson for me. It's been huge. I was at Telstra doing a very corporate job, and took the leap and ended up here. And I couldn't have been luckier or happier to be where I am.
Incredible. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm going to pass this to Remya, because Remya, you've had an amazing career, but also you've moved markets, you've moved countries during a pandemic, and I suppose you learned heaps as well. I'm assuming. What would your letter say?
I think a few things, starting with really being kind to myself. I feel like as someone who grew up in India, which is a very patriarchal society, and I grew up in a little town in Kerala, which it's a very, very small village, and everyone knew everyone in the village kind of situation. So I always thought that's my world and that's where I belong, and I never knew what world existed outside of that little place. But as I was growing into my teens and starting to explore with computers and really being part of the technology world, it really opened up doors that there is a world outside. So if I had to write a letter to my younger self, I would say the world is your oyster, and don't limit yourself with where you were born and what abilities you have. Challenge the norms and challenge your belief and work hard, and your hard work and determination could take you anywhere. I probably wouldn't have imagined I'm sitting here and talking to you in this panel, because 10 years ago, I didn't speak English. So the first thing I have to do is to go and learn a new language to be able to get out of a country that I'm born in. And I never thought about it 15 years ago. And that's, for me, is something I'm glad I challenged myself to do that. But obviously, also do it in a kind of way, like, you have to look after yourself and actually have those boundaries in place, so you don't get burnt out as you progress your career and your personal life.
Such a good call out as well. Like, you want to challenge yourself, but also women can be, we like to do things amazingly, borderline be perfectionists, but also don't want to burn out. So it's a balance that I think it's a continuously in conversation. No one's ever figured it out, but thank you so much for sharing that. And to close us off before we go into Q&As, so I'll end this with, maybe I'll pass this to Ailie first with the next question. To end on a high, what keeps you going when the going gets really tough? When those moments where, I suppose we've talked about how some of us have been lucky not to experience certain things, but when times are tough, and like Ailie, when you were in that room where you were being drowned out by, unfortunately, that team that you were talking about, what routines, resources, or rituals got you through, or could you recommend to help us realign, focus, keep moving on?
So one thing that I've kind of done whenever I've been a little bit like, everything's like bad, like the patriarch's awful, is I've just watched the movie On the Basis of Sex, like again and again, because it just does show how far society has actually come. And sure, we've got like a while to go, but we've come a really, really long way in quite a short period of time. So, and hopefully like that kind of time amount versus how much we're achieving just kind of keeps on snowballing, and things keep on happening, which I think it will. But so I guess some other things that have kind of kept me going as well is just always talking to people whenever the going gets tough, is just picking up the phone and calling people as much as often, or catching up with friends whenever I can. I definitely do a bit of journaling as well. I know that helps heaps of people, and it definitely helps me as well. Another thing that's quite, I don't know if it's weird or not, but something that really helps me is being on top of my finances. And I don't know if that sounds odd, but so my mum is a counsellor and has done a huge amount of financial counselling for people. And I used to work at CommBank, and we did heaps of research projects around women that, had really messed up their finances. And a lot of that was to do with relationships and work, and how they'd kind of live their lives in quite a patriarchal society. And I think something you can do as a woman to just feel good about yourself sometimes is get on top of your finances, because it feels great to actually be in charge of that. So that's kind of more one thing that you block some time out and just do. But other things for me as well is always just nature, getting back to nature whenever I'm feeling burnt out, going for walks, bike riding, swimming, listening to a heap of podcasts as well. I always love the TED Radio Hour is my favorite one, just whenever I'm feeling uninspired, and I just listen to TED Talks and like, there's so much to be inspired by in the world. There's so much great stuff. Or even, and one of my favorite blogs is the Extraordinary Routines blog, and just being like, no, like I'm not stuck in a rut. I can look at all the things these people are doing. I can definitely shake up my routine. So there's lots of things there, but it's good to have lots of different things to do when you're getting stuck.
Amazing. Lots of different stimuli and different formats and mediums. So I'm jotting them down. Can't wait to share it with the community over here. Ailie, keen to hear from you. Any that perhaps is different to what Ailie mentioned as well?
Yeah, no, I love all the tips from Ellie, and I agree with the money side of things. It's actually quite powerful what we women can actually unlearn and start learning about money, and retire at 50, why not, or earlier, like it's really possible. I'm a routine and personal development junkie, so I do spend at least 10 to 12 hours a week on me, like literally on me. And that didn't come naturally. I've never was an early person. I never, ever would do a lot of things for myself. And it wasn't until I really reached an episode of mental burnout and a major anxiety that I actually had to work on myself. So I hope that's not the case for you, but if it is, definitely the routines help immensely. It's like little babies, you know, if you had those little ones at home, or your kids or cousins or nephews, nieces, they just want to be fed, have a bath, eat. And we humans are pretty much like that. You know, you need to have these routines. Like right now, I kid you not, I wake up and I have to go to the gym. If I don't go to the gym, it feels like my day is like something is off. And this didn't happen naturally. This was definitely a process. So similar to Ailie, I journal, I meditate, I do cold showers. In Brisbane is ridiculous because the water is not really that cold this time of year. But cold showers actually help you regulate your system, and a lot of fancy words I cannot repeat in this moment, but it really actually helps with different things. One thing that I do, and I did actually started hypnotherapy as part of the work that I do for Square One, like redesign, but also myself. And it's a very easy technique. Every day you would have different interactions, activities, and thoughts. And so our primitive brain, which is part of our brains, will choose what's bad and what's wrong, just because our primitive brain has been with us for millions of years. But if you actually start writing down, and this is an exercise I would love for you to do every day. If you constantly during your day write down what are your positive thoughts, your positive activities, and your positive interactions, even if they're very small, like, you know, I've had a bad day, but I still had a cup of tea, or that meeting was horrendous, but I still realize that, you know, I'm acknowledging that it was, or I don't want to get out of bed, but, you know, I at least had a shower, whatever it is, even in the worst days. What that will do is that you will start setting neural pathways between your primitive brain and your rational brain, and you will be more able to take decisions that you felt that in the past where you were not confident enough or capable enough or good enough, just because your primitive brain, you're not feeding your primitive brain as much. So that's a very important technique. I will absolutely love you for you to practice, and it would actually make you be more confident. So that's it for me.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that, especially in our current work from home life. Routines are going to be really, really instrumental. We can't ignore them anymore. And best thing to do with them is to be mindful and very present in how we run them in our days. Well, we could sit here and talk for a long time, but very conscious of time and very keen to dig into some of the amazing questions we're getting in right now. So thank you so much so far to our panelists, for answering all our questions. We could definitely dive into so much more, but let's go into some audience questions because we have a few. So I'm going to pass it back to Anshal to take us through them.
Amazing. Thanks, Berlin. That was such a great conversation. And just to sort of add to that, I'm going to ask some of the questions. So I'm going to take the executive decision and choose my favorite question over here, which is the highest voted one as well. So don't worry. I guess I'll open it up to everybody. What are interview or research questions you would ask to understand the diversity and inclusive culture of the company you're interested in joining? I think that's such an interesting one. I'll open it up to anyone who wants to go ahead and answer.
Very simple. I'm part of the inclusion and diversity team in the organization I'm at, and I would ask how many Black people and how many Aboriginal people, if in Australia, are in the diversity and inclusion team. That would give you some indication. That is from me.
I'd probably start by asking, does the company have an inclusion and diversity team at all? That would probably be one thing. But also, yeah, as well, to just see a bit of a split of who actually works at the company and, you know, what roles are they in, who's in the leadership roles.
That is so interesting. How about you, Remya? Do you have anything to add over there, or Susie?
I think I'll probably do a bit of research before I go to an interview on company page to understand what is their commitment to create a diverse team, and also looking at, pretty much looking at the leadership team to see, how the leadership team is structured. Are they all, white men, or are they any kind of leadership, diversity in the top layer? That also gives you a bit of an indication. And then I would probably take some of those questions during the interview process to ask them, what are you doing about increasing diversity in your leadership and that kind of level. So it's multi-stage process, but you could always start with doing your own research, so you appear more knowledgeable about that company and you're really interested in being a part of the organization, but really looking at how they're dealing with the diversity and inclusion aspect. That's what I would do.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I would agree with that. And I think the other thing that I've always found tells us a really good story about the company you are about to walk into is when you walk through it. So as you're walking through, for your interview, or look around and see what are the types of people that are around. Who are they? What do they look like? What are they doing? I think that gives a really strong feel about a culture, just being a part of it or being in it. But also things that that I've found really excited in places like the city of Melbourne when I used to work there was they are very proud about diversity, and you see it on their Instagram and you see it in their media. So I think there's a lot to say for the bravery, or people, organisations being brave enough to stand up and say we support diversity and this is how we do it, and seeing that is just as important, I think.
No, that's very interesting how you mentioned that. I think it's such a big part of what organizations are concentrating on as well. And I think the more people ask these questions, the more valuable it is for the other side to realize how important it is now in today's day and age, and not just a token thing that you need to do, which is quite interesting. I'll move on to the next question, which I think I find very interesting is, so what are some things you've seen male colleagues do to amplify female voices that have been positive or impactful? What are some ways men can continue to do to help women grow? And wondering whether, any of you have had experiences where, whether it's a mentor or, a manager who's male, who's actually amplified what you're doing in your career, and if you have experiences to share around that, or vice versa.
I can go first. I guess there are multiple things a male colleague or a leader could help us do. Forging new paths or creating new opportunities for our work to be visible. And sometimes some of these opportunities are, I feel like because women may not be represented in that top layer or the leadership layer, we do not know where such forums are where we could represent our work and talk about our team and our own work. And secondly, one of the big things I'm super passionate about is addressing pay inequality in our workplaces. So I have often worked behind the scene to make sure, when I start with a company, looking at how my team is getting paid, and often I see significant differences between someone on the same level, but between male and female. And I'm talking about 20K plus increments. So when I'm exposing some of these systematic, issues in the organization, some men are quite receptive and they are like, yep, let's fix it, or we haven't seen that before, thank you for addressing. But some men are like, oh, that's a system issue, and we probably need to go through HR and get through some of these red tapes. So I have experienced both sides, and I have worked with leaders who are actively trying to help us get to the, to make sure that our people are paid in a fair way and actually addressing that pay parity. But I have also worked with people who are aware of this, or they are aware that there are systematic, biases and the way our systems are created to actually prevent women from getting a promotion or a pay increase, but actively choosing not to do anything about it. So it's about calling it out. If you see something, call it out. And if that person is not reacting, go one level up and let them know. And this is your chance to create a workplace that helps other women to come and be a part of it and really actively advocate for that change.
Oh, that's very interesting, Remya, that you mentioned that. I think, like you said, both things exist, and I've often seen men be the other way, where it's like, oh, this is, we need to talk to HR about this, and it often feels like you need to say something, and that's where we as women can do something, where we can say, no, that's not an HR issue, but we need to take a step ahead and do something about it. So that's really interesting. Is there anyone else in the panel who would like to talk about how men have helped them or others in their organization to help women amplify women's voices, female voices?
So just just super quickly, I just wanted to say that a lot of, particularly kind of earlier on, my best mentors were pretty much always men, and they, that's definitely not the case now. I have a good split, but I had some really, really incredible male mentors, and which has been great, and they've always been willing to help out. But I think another thing, so particularly from Fjord, is that we actually, none of the leadership team, female or male, value overconfidence at Fjord, which is often a very male trait, to kind of be overconfident about something, and instead it's about seeing overconfidence for what it is and really valuing being humble and just having a lot of humility, which is one of the reasons I really love working here. So that's kind of my point for the moment.
No, that's a great point you brought up, and I think that sort of fits in a lot with the other question that we have about how overconfidence is always looked at as a way to progress, and the confidence, men are often seen as more confident than women when it comes to sharing work or talking about their work. So this was specifically to Ailie. So Ailie, you made a great point that women aren't very good at promoting their work and what they're doing. So what do you recommend, or what do you do to promote your work? What would you recommend others, some practices or tips that you might have to younger women who want to promote their work and sort of amplify their voice, I guess?
Yeah, I love to say that as anything in life, there are going to be haters in this process, and there's going to be a lot of men as well. She's just oversharing, she's just showing off. But if it was a man showing off, nobody will say a thing. So we just got to really deal with that and go, that's how the world works. However, I will be sharing what I believe has been, something that has had an incredible impact on my team or the organization. And I think, first, this is a conversation that you could have with your manager and say, look, I love to really make sure that we are creating awareness about the work that we're doing. And so I love to put my hand up for that. And it doesn't really sound like I just want to tell the world what I'm doing. It's I really want people to see that we're doing incredible work, because some of the time you'll be working with a group of people. So I think sometimes it's actually just really take, 25, 30 minutes and write down what are the ways that I like to show my work over the next month. And that's something that I used to do. I used to write down purposely, what is the work that I'm doing and how am I gonna share it? Sometimes you have a Yama sort of channel maybe in your organization, or you might have one of those internal sort of corporate Facebook groups, whatever it is, and put it out as a celebration. I think we women don't celebrate our work enough. Okay, sorry. Okay, Bobby, we'll just have as much as you can, okay? Sorry. Is that we want to put our voices out there without really feeling that we're coming across as maybe a show off, and that's not the case. So I think it's just being actually very purposeful, writing down how can I share it, speak to your manager and say, look, I think a lot for this to be promoted in a way that feels positive. And I think actually other people would love that, and other people would learn from that, and other people would ultimately really reward that behavior, and other people will start replicating, other women will. And I always think we women are representing millions of women that don't have the voice that we have. And sometimes it's just really doing that. It's what voice do I want to have in that moment to make sure that other women can then do that and follow that example. So just write it down and get started with that. That's a simple first step.
No, that's amazing. It's so interesting because every time I felt like I would be showing off my work as well. And I often this might be controversial, but I often would think of, someone like my brother-in-law, white male, what would he do? That's my sort of mechanism to be like, okay, in the same situation, if he was doing the exact same task, how would he talk about it? And that's been like a way for me to almost kind of, recraft the way I would say things. And it's almost like this filter, using that filter to amplify my voice. But I don't know if it's a bit controversial. I don't think he would appreciate if I said that in front of him.
But I love that. That's like a superpower. It's almost like putting your cape of superpower, and that's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. Whatever works for you, really.
I have a really quick question to bump in, if that's okay, Anshal, because
Yeah,
Ailie and Ailie both talked about something that before we leave, I have to ask. Ailie, you mentioned that Fjord doesn't value overconfidence. Ailie, you talked about we need to find a balance in our own way to show off our work. I'm also very acutely aware that tall poppy syndrome is a thing that is significantly obvious in Australia. I'm a migrant, so I didn't grow up here, but it's real. And so with that extra complexity, I suppose a question to Ailie, how do people call out when overconfidence is shown? Like, how do they do it? How do they go about it? Because I'm curious to hear how that happens, because I think it is a sensitive, multi-layered thing to address, isn't it?
So it's almost, because pretty much no one in our team really has this kind of overconfidence thing, when someone does come up and have it, like straight away someone calls bullshit on them, and just kind of says it straight away and just gives them the feedback for it. Because I almost thought you were going to ask the question instead, like, if people aren't overconfident, how do they share work? So almost the opposite of that, we actually have to force people to share work sometimes, and we have a lot of platforms for doing it instead, because people don't just do it automatically. But yeah, like, I mean, definitely we are still part of a major consulting organization, and so definitely there's people that will come across within our work that are overconfident, but just within the Fjord team, we're so hyper aware of it, and we're so much more used to having imposter syndrome than being overconfident, that when someone does have this ridiculous confidence, it's like, who's that person? And someone calls them out on it. Like, literally, we'll always just call them out on it.
No, that's really amazing. I think it's quite a balance that you need to have, right? Where it's not, it doesn't come across as arrogance, but it comes across as good confidence. And it doesn't, like, it's that sort of threshold between, at what point does it cross and become overconfidence? And you need to be confident, because I think that some confidence is always good, but that it's when it steps above that line and becomes slightly arrogant, that's where we need to also balance that. It's very interesting that you brought that up as well. I am going to, I guess we're almost at the end of our time over here, but I guess one question, last question, I guess, for everyone in the panel is, what can other leaders or designers do to better support and help junior females? What do you suggest for others to help bring juniors along and make sure things don't just get competitive? I'll just open it up to everyone. Maybe Susie, I think we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think juniors in RACV world, we have a great grad program, but I think that nurturing and mentorship is really, really important, particularly when it comes to confidence. So starting out in design, I know when it was me back in the day, just having that support, or that buddy, or that person you can turn to. So I think this is where the mentorship becomes really critical, because it's at those moments when you are starting out and your confidence is, in potentially a shaky place, you really need that person to just turn to and say, actually, it's just a bad day, and tomorrow it will be different. And these are some of the things and advice that I can give you to help you navigate that, because I think all designers know that you never know what you're going to walk into. You don't know who you're going to speak to, or what answers you're going to hear, or how, what your day is going to look like, because that's design. That's the beauty of it, and that's the excitement of it. But knowing someone's got your back, I think, is one of the most important things I had that really kept me on this path, because it could have been easy to jump off and go back into a safe corporate job again. But when someone believes in you, I think that is your own superpower. It's kind of like that thing that keeps you moving forward.
That's great. That's amazing. I'm also going to ask Remya, we haven't heard from you. What do you think there are some ways that you can better support and help junior females?
I think I'm going to take a stance more as a design leader perspective. One is, again, creating a great grad program. And I've been lucky to work organizations like RE Group and Coles, where they already have a great grad program in place. But if my call to action for any leadership, people in this call is to, if your organization doesn't have it, how do you create it? Because our industry got a lot of women, especially trying to move into UX, or already in UX, trying to look for their first, job or first gig. And often it's very hard. And I remember having conversations with both Anshel and Berlin, and they were at different points in their journey to, help support having those, being a sounding board, I guess. But it's very hard, because there's not many companies who are ready to, embrace the, junior folks, because they always wanted someone who's ready to hit the ground running from day one. And often the reality is that that's not possible. But then are looking at how do we create a continuous loop so that we could bring new people on board and mentor and coach them so that they can become and support other people. And secondly, I think I want to go back to a conversation we had on lack of mentorship. If you're looking for a mentorship, don't just look in one person. Create your own board of mentors, or create your own group of mentors, because sometimes having that mentorship from multiple people gives you new perspective to the same challenge. And I think that's something always helped me in my journey when I was moving into UX and actually growing my career in that space. So that'll be the other thing I would recommend, where, if you're not getting the support from the person you're looking for, reach out, try more people, and you would definitely hear back from some. And also, if you're someone who's been asked for help, and if you don't have the capacity or mental bandwidth to support someone else, I'm sure you might know other women who could support. And I recently reached out to Berlin to say, hey, Berlin, can you help out this person who's trying to move into UX? I do not have capacity. I don't have the knowledge how I can guide them. So delegate and actually create and curate those connections through your own network, and see how those women thrive.
No, that's a great point that you brought up about mentorship as well, and as well as grad programs. I think it's interesting. Recently, had a conversation with someone about, you don't just need professional mentors, but sometimes also personal mentors, just to basically, sometimes you're going through what changes or things you need to do in life, and decisions that all sometimes trade between personal and professional. So different people have different sort of dynamic that you might have with them, or relationship that you might have with them. So always helps to have a diverse group of people that you can reach out to and talk to about different things and different aspects of your career and personal and professional life both. And I think, just on that note of grad programs as well, I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug over here, but Berlin and I both work at Xero, and Xero has a grad program that's opening up. So if anyone is keen to apply or just talk about what it looks like, definitely reach out to us as well. But yeah, on that note, I would like to sort of end the Q&A and end this night on a very good note about, I think there's a lot for us to learn, and we as women can just help and support and sponsor each other. I think that's the best step and advice I have learned from this panel as well. And I really thank all of you guys, Remya, Ailie, and Susie, for taking time and talking to us about your experiences as women in design. And just to end, we've talked about so many different interesting ways to do things and resources. So what we'll do is create a list of resources after this after this panel and send it across to you guys on Meetup. So hopefully that can be helpful for everyone, and feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to anyone at ladies.ux if you want to talk more, share more, and we're always there to help. Thanks so much.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.